Blue Ridge PBS Echo is pleased to partner with Virtual Virginia and VSTE, the Virginia Society for Technology in Education, to share recordings of the VIBE Professional Development webinars. VIBE stands for Virginia is into Blended Education, and these workshops are delivered via the Virtual Virginia Professional Learning Platform. If you'd like to learn more, contact your division technology leaders to find out how to enroll in courses that delve deeper into the principles contained in these videos.
So here's our agenda today. We'll be talking about voice and choice, front loading, driving questions, as well as the authentic audience and really creating that culture of constructive critique. And I came across this quote. Actually, my niece shared it somewhere on Facebook, and she's an educator of the arts in California and teaches salsa dancing online to her students, which is super cool. And this quote really resonated with me because I just love the idea of the teacher helping the students fine-tune their learning, not just teaching them new tricks. So I just love this quote.
And that we felt like, Laura and I talked about this the other day, we felt like this is a little better than the, oh, what's the one that we always say?
Sage on the stage, guide on the side.
Yeah, I love this one. It's a nice update.
Because it talks more about what we want the students to be doing to really fine tune that learning.
Exactly.
So with project-based learning, the main thing I really want to stress in this presentation is it's not something that you only do when you're working through your project. Project-based learning needs to be a culture in your classroom. And the best way to cultivate that is to really focus on the elements throughout all of your lessons, not all of the elements at one time, but perhaps as you are working on lessons. So when you get to your project, the students aren't saying, oh, this is a new thing that we only do when we're doing project-based learning. The gold standard is Pbl Works. A lot of you may know this by BIE, Buck Institute, which is actually where I received my training. And this is one of the models with the elements. And as you could see, one thing flows to the other. And it doesn't mean it has to even flow in that direction. The reflection could add to more student voice and choice, or it could add to additional critique. And it's kind of a cycle where you're really focusing on the knowledge, the understanding, and really the students' success skills. And while I was going back to this site, which I visit quite often, I noticed that there's a framework, high quality Pbl framework, which really focuses on equity and where all students deserve to have these high quality projects. So it means that you're not just checking off and saying, I'm going to do this project because my administrator said I had to do a Pbl project. High quality means you include those elements and all of your students will benefit from that. So voice and choice is a really important aspect of project-based learning. And I'm going to talk to you just for a moment about a naturally occurring voice and choice scenario. And this child is actually 5 years old. She's my neighbor's child, and my neighbor posted this. And also, she's also a Virtual Virginia teacher. But after viewing a preschool show called Bluey, which are like little 8-minute episodes, she was so inspired to help the world. So she started with her neighborhood and she created these $100 bills. She wrapped them up in duct tape, and you'll see she's dressed in her bike gear because she delivered them to each neighbor. And then when her mom posted this picture, everybody gave her feedback. So it was just kind of a very naturally occurring situation and a really awesome family. So and I don't know if the mom is in the audience or not, but if she is, she should be really proud this little girl. So with voice and choice in your classroom, you're really talking about giving students a choice, not just everybody will create the Washington Monument with sugar cubes, which we all did in 6th grade before preparing us. That was supposed to prepare us for our trip to Washington, D.C. It was very tasty, but it was a little boring when everybody came in with the same project. So you want to have the students perhaps select the product that they want to prepare, or select their focus, their topic, or even their presentation choice. So that doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're going to say you can do whatever you want. It has to be very controlled. And last week, Katie had a wonderful suggestion with voice and choice, and she uses choice boards and starts out at the beginning of the year with, do you want this or that? 2 choices. And then she builds and develops that throughout the school year. And Katie had some wonderful examples of that that she shared, and some of them are Canvas modules that you can just import right into your Canvas class. So collaboration is important as well. So some students prefer to work by themselves. Some students like to work in groups, and sometimes you can give them the option. That doesn't mean that every time a student who wants to work by themselves will always have that opportunity. But when it's something that students really need to focus on, then they should be able to choose how they want to create the project. Now, there's other ways to do the grouping. You could have students self-select, who do you want to work with, and then everybody works with their friends, and that's, you know, could be neither here nor there. Or you could select randomly, or the teacher could select what students work with each other. It could even be on an interest basis. If you use the collaboration feature in Canvas, you actually can decide if students are going to self-select or random, or you can actually create those groups. And that works really well. Some students like different areas to work. For example, they may want to work in the hallway. I know I've heard teachers with their Chromebook say, oh, if you want to work in the hallway, you could do it. If you want to sit in the reading section, you can do it. So wherever you want to work, and there's something about that voice and choice, or that choice, that lets students feel like they are valued. So with expression, you really want students to be able to tell it their way. You don't want them to sound like an encyclopedia. So perhaps you give them different ways to express themselves. Is it text? Is it oral? Is it online? Is it something that they're acting out? So you let the students show their side and tell it the way that they understand it.
One thing I just wanted to add to that, and you mentioned at the beginning there, Laura, is that a lot of teachers kind of fear that idea of giving up control, but
right.
you still control your learning objectives. You still control the standards. You know, it's not, I love the way you said it. It's not just choose whatever you want to do. You know, oh, we've learned about this and just do whatever you like. You know, it's not just chaos. It's still, you know, guided learning, but you're using the project as part of the instruction, not as the end, not the dessert, but kind of the main course, so to speak.
Right. Good point. With front loading and really working with the students on the PBL, rather than do your entire lesson the way that you've always done it and then say, oh, now we get to do a project. That's kind of what Stephen was talking about with the dessert. That's a dessert project. When we're done, this is what we'll do. But PBL happens throughout the learning, and as many times as you could create mini lessons, either prior to a task or perhaps give the students time to explore the materials first and then provide the lesson. So maybe they're doing some measurement, and then you can kind of observe how the students measure, and most won't start at the 0. Maybe they'll start at the 1, and you want to kind of redirect that and then explain what all of the different little lines in that ruler means, and how to write that and really develop the lesson that way. So with scaffolding that learning, you want to make sure you're really providing smaller steps with feedback or smaller projects. A project could be a 1 day, 1 period event. It doesn't have to be a 3 or 4 week or a month-long project. So we want students to receive gentle feedback. Maybe it's just from the teacher, or they could do self-reflection, peer reflection to really add to that. The just-in-time learning is great. You see the students start to work, and then you could say, oh, I see such and such students figured out a way to do it this way. This might be a good way to do it. Last week, Katie talked a lot about curating your materials. So you want to provide perhaps a tutorial for the lesson so the students can go back and they can get that refresher or that reminder. One of my favorite tools is Vocaroo, and it's a super easy recording tool, requires no login, but you can create QR codes. So having those QR codes around the room for maybe some reminders of sequencing or steps or things to remember when you're working on these projects or whatever activity or skill you're working on. And I guess I'm talking a little fast. Oh, I do have 15 minutes. Okay, I looked at the date and not the time, so I was thinking I was short of time. But driving question. This is what drives your project. And you want to make sure your driving question is engaging, it's open-ended, and it includes your learning goals. You can include the actual authentic role. You're an architect, you're designing a water park, or a specific product, what they'll create in the long run, or even the event like a community event. So creating that driving question is really important, not to be too specific and not to be too general. And I think it's great to have the students involved in refining that driving question. Maybe they're just like, I don't really know what that means. Where would that take us? So maybe adding in any details that are needed so that all the students are on the same page, understanding, and really have some connection with that driving question. Your driving question drives your inquiry. So it's important, I think, to post that driving question throughout the lesson and constantly come back to it and discuss it, but also leave that driving question visible somewhere in your classroom during the entire year, because hopefully you will be able to make future connections in lessons that you work on in your classroom, that students might say, oh, here's another way we could add to what we were learning about with that initial project. The need to know is really the students' inquiry. What do they need to know to create this project, to engage with their peers, to critique what they have? And here is a wonderful tool that I found by using Mote, which is another tool that Katie mentioned. She just got me into this rabbit hole with a lot of her tools. But this activity, there's a link to it, and it's a See, Think, Wonder. So students can actually add an audio Mote to this document, because I think that it really frees students up to tell what they know and what they think and what they wonder about. I think sometimes students get a little too bogged down if they have to actually handwrite, write everything in there. And then I always suggest to have a KWHL chart in the classroom, like what do we already know? What did we cover in a previous lesson that can help us learn about this topic? What are some things that we wonder about? What do we want to know? And how will we do that? What are some tools that we can use other than just Google it to get some of those answers? And then at the end, what have we learned from this PBL? So finding engaging audiences can be a challenge, and that can be when teachers say, oh yeah, they'll just present it to each other And I don't know if you're going to get the buy-in from your students if that is the case. But one thing I really like to point out is that your audience doesn't have to happen at the end of your project. You could invite a professional to your classroom, either by Zoom or face-to-face, and that consultant can really explain the process and the details that go into perhaps being an architect or conducting an interview. And maybe that professional would be willing to come back and consult with your students throughout the project. So it doesn't have to be at the very end, like we think of students presenting and everybody goes to the auditorium. It can just be so many different options. So really take it beyond your classroom. Invite other classes, invite other grade levels, make some global connections, but really take your students beyond their comfort level of just the peers in their classroom. One example that I love that one of the teachers in one of the classes that I facilitate came up with is that this teacher provides some information to parents about some conversations they can have at the dinner table based on what they're discussing in class. So maybe when you ask your children or your child or my kids who are now grown, you know, what did you learn in school today? And you'll either get nothing or maybe you'll get a little bit more. But that dinner conversation may be something that really helps the student explain to their parents what they're learning, and it may open up a whole new conversation. I know when I was growing up on Sundays, we always ate at the dining room, and my dad would go through and pick out a topic that he thought was interesting in the news. And then we would all discuss it and we would talk about our point of view. And he would say, why do you think that? And we would have to back it up. And it was just a whole dinner time conversation, but because we were kind of eating and talking, it just became part of the routine. And we always kind of knew that we were going to discuss something very interesting, and we always wondered what he was going to come up with at that time. So also, when you create your project, you want to make it real. So if you say that your students are going to create posters on mental health for teens, and then the school will, or maybe a mental health professional will assist in selecting the best 5, and then they'll be printed and displayed around the school. If that's what you say you're going to do, that has to happen. It can't just be, oh, well, we'll just share it in this classroom. It really has to happen, and they need to see that it is a real activity. If you choose to write a letter or visit a school board meeting, perhaps you connect with the school board member prior to and let them know what the purpose of your activity is so that they can respond appropriate to your students. But really make it real and stick to it. If you say you're going to do something, it has to really happen. Your online audience is very important. There's so many tools out there. I'm just going to mention Flipgrid because that is one that I've used when teachers were explaining their project to other educators that they had created online. Then, of course, with Flipgrid, you can also get feedback on that. So that's a wonderful way to get an online audience. Padlet is another tool. If you use something, Google Slides or another Google product, just make sure you click on publish to the web so that people without a Google presence could also view that document.
I want to just add a couple things quickly there, Laura. You mentioned the dinner time conversation like that you had with your family, you know, with your dad.
Right.
And the thing that really caught me with that was how it normalized the thinking and the fact, and you actually said we knew that that was going to happen and we were going to back up what we said and we were going to talk about it. Students need that same thing as well. You know, if PBL or blended learning, whatever, you know, instructional initiative you get into, they need to realize that it is going to be a normalized kind of thing. And it's not just that something else, this extra thing. And you can take small steps to get there, but, you know, making it regular, making it routine, that really does help.
The culture of creating that culture of constructive critique. And many of you are probably know of Ron Berger. And I love that he has those 3 very simple words that you make your critique kind, specific, and helpful. Those are just 3 things that are really easy to remember. But rather than just saying, oh, that was great, you did a wonderful job, well, maybe that was kind, but it wasn't specific and there was nothing helpful about it. So to really work on those 3 aspects can really help develop that culture. And start with short activities, such as the think, pair, share. So, the students are thinking about a topic, they're working in pairs, they're sharing, maybe they're giving them each other feedback, but just keep to very simple things at first. That leads me into protocols, which are really structured support. And the School Reform Initiative, that link takes you to well over 100 protocols, but most of those protocols are things that you do in the classroom. You create a chart. I like the idea of taking a protocol such as the feedback carousel in that goldenrod copy there, and put it in a format where everyone can type in their responses so that there's a lasting effect there, and the project owners or project group can go back to that to say, oh, so-and-so had a helpful resource. Maybe we should follow up with that rather than having to go to a written document somewhere in the classroom. So the protocols really help to practice and develop the good use of time management and really meaningful feedback. And that critique really does support the enhancement of each project. Another activity that I found in Mote, so you can see I've been going down this rabbit hole, Katie, if you happen to be here, but this is an audio rubric that links to an audio rubric where teachers and students can really provide their comment on their project. So I think a lot of times when students are working on a rubric, they look at the results of it. Did I get 4s on everything? What was low? Why was that low? But with the audio rubrics, you can actually get a lot more detail than just a score on a rubric. So I highly recommend testing out Mote and looking at some of those educational activities that are supported.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to let folks know that we are going to provide the recording, and we will also provide a copy of the presentation itself. So you're going to get all these links.
Okay, and just to mention that this is a resource list of some of the things that I mentioned throughout the presentation, and some of the things like the voice and choice. There's an excellent article in PBL Works. Another tool that I don't know that I had mentioned out loud was Book Creator. Is a wonderful way to create, collaborate, and publish content. They have a lot of nice formats, newspaper formats and different formats. The driving question, this article, I just love this article because it really talks about refining that driving question and how you can write one that's very successful. And then I also included the links to Ron Berger's video if you are not aware of the wonderful work that he does, as well as the school reform protocols, which you can choose. And I highly recommend that you modify them to work for your classroom.